So, greetings everyone. My name is Iryna Manukovska and this Make Your Innovation Work podcast. And today I'm pleased to host Colm O'Brien from Dublin. And we're going to talk about the power of mistakes. A lot of us were struggling with this issue because we want to plan as much as we can in advance. We want to feel safe, we want to feel confident, we want to have control over things, but unfortunately life happens and everything happens. And Colm has extensive background and he's learning from mistake advocate, I think the biggest one I've ever met. So without further ado, I pass my word to Colm. Colm, can you please tell a little bit about your experience? You have extensive business experience and how related to mistakes and
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Iryna, for inviting me to join you. This is fantastic. I am from Dublin originally. I'm zooming in from Limerick in Ireland, in the Midwest of Ireland, today in my office in our school meals business, which I'll talk about in a moment. But you can see from the grey hair that I've got extensive experience, and as Iryna has introduced me as the biggest sort of failure advocate that she has met so far. So our first business failed spectacularly. I wanted to be a school teacher. This is the potted history, but it might be of interest to people. I wanted to be a school teacher when I was leaving school back in the 1980s, and I didn't do the work, didn't get into college, didn't get enough grades to get into college. And so I stumbled into a job in hospitality in a restaurant in Dublin City, and I enjoyed it. And I found I like people and I like the work. And if you enjoy something, you tend to get good at it. If you get good at it, you get on in it. And I ended up managing a cafe called Bewley's Cafe on Grafton Street in Dublin. Some of your listeners will know that. Very famous, probably the most famous cafe on the island of Ireland. Ended up as general manager of that many, many years ago. But that was a pinnacle of my corporate journey. So I was involved in the corporate world for about 20 years. Nearly 20 years before I finally began to bet on myself and step out. A friend of mine describes it as the fur-lined mousetrap. That's what the corporate world is, right? It's safe, it's warm, it's cozy. You got the paycheck at the end of the week or the end of the month. It's very difficult to escape from because you're then faced with risk. And of course, eventually I decided I was going to bet on myself, convince my wife, we'll leave Dublin, we'll leave all of our friends, we'll take our 2 children at the time, we've 3 now, we go to Limerick, it's going to be great. And we go down here for 5 years. This was the plan. And we make some money, or a few bob, as we say here in Ireland, make some money, and we'll then get the heck out of Dodge and go back to our lives in Dublin. But the universe had a completely different plan, and our business failed within those first 5 years, right? So best laid plans of mice and men. We took on this cafe business under the Bewley's name, which was I was the general manager of the flagship. I became the franchise manager for the brand. So I knew a lot about the brand, and yet it still failed. But it failed largely because of factors beyond our control, and we can talk about that some other time, happily. But anyway, it failed, and that wasn't nice. Nobody sets up in business to fail. Everybody sets up expecting their business to work, and the question is, well, what if it doesn't work? And we got to the point where it didn't work, and we realized we had to reinvent and reimagine, and then that led to a whole series of events, which we can talk about in a moment if you wish. And that business was a €1 million business back in the day. We've got a 17 million euro business from the failure of that. So it was a mistake. We made mistakes. We learned from those mistakes. We failed forward, and thankfully we have failed upward. So
and how you did understood that you actually failed, that you need to stop and do something else, or differently. So what's this tipping point?
Really good question, Iryna. I learned it was a very painful period. Let's make no bones about it. Very painful. The home nearly went, the family home nearly went as a result. It didn't, thank goodness, but it nearly did. Very stressful time for myself and my wife and our kids. But once it failed, we realized, and this I think is important, the business had failed, we hadn't failed, right? We had to separate ourselves from the business. The business had failed, we hadn't failed. And there was a perfect storm. There were 4 events that happened in relatively relatively short succession here in Ireland that caused the failure. The first one was there were all these younger, sexier brands coming into the coffee space, the Insomnias, the Starbucks or whatever back in the day, or whatever those versions were back in the early 2000s. So they were diluting the marketplace. So our business had begun a slow decline around the turn of the century. And then two things happened. There was a case, an outbreak of foot and mouth disease here on the island of Ireland, which is a bovine disease. But the government told everybody to stay indoors, not stay indoors, but don't go into the cities because you'll drag this with you. So they stayed out of the city. So our business took a hit by about 20% overnight because of that. And just as we were coming out of that, 9/11 struck. And I often wondered, well, how could something in New York happen, affect our business in Limerick in Ireland? And the answer was Shannon International Airport. And nobody flew back into it. So our business stayed flat, Iryna. That was 2001. And then 2002, we had a rent increase, and our rent went up to €1,000 per day. €1,000 per day. There was this thing called the Celtic Tiger. It was madness in Ireland at the time. And our rent went to €1,000 a day. And once that happened, a combination of those four elements, it was a perfect economic storm and put us out of business. And we had to reinvent ourselves. And I met a man on the train, and if I may, I'll relate this story, or do you want me to go somewhere else with the conversation? I'll relate the story.
Oh, no. I think this story is a very powerful example how anyone can use any kind of like hints from universe or serendipity or anything to get out of this crisis. I mean, mentally.
Yeah. Okay. I know it's an important part of my journey. So we moved to Limerick. We took on the business. It was going really well for a while. Then it stopped, and then it wasn't. Then it failed. And I used to think, Iryna, that a business failure happened overnight. You'd go in on Tuesday and you just couldn't make it work anymore. But no, that it was more like a slow car crash or train crash in slow motion, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. So I began to look around to see what we were going to do next. And you asked earlier, why did I keep going? I had broken free of the fur-lined mousetrap, and I didn't want to go back, right? I had realized that even though it was difficult, I was still in charge. I didn't, it was up to me. And so I started looking around for something else to do, and I met a man on a train, and this changed my life, right? This one meeting. And this one meeting has been worth over €100 million in sales ever since, right? This one meeting. Random meeting, or is it random? I think it was the universe. Okay, so as we were trying to rescue our situation, because of my training, my background, I assumed I would end up in the coffee shop business. It made sense in the franchising sector. And myself and my brother and a friend, we set up some small coffee kiosks in Dublin on the Liffey Boardwalk. Some of your listeners will know these kiosks. And I thought that's what we were going to do. We were going to reinvent ourselves and franchise those on. And I was on the train from Limerick to Dublin one morning to check on those new kiosks. And I met this man, and we were just, sat facing the same way. He was on the window side, I was on the outside. And we just nodded at each other, got on with our journeys. And then towards the end of the journey, we sort of introduced ourselves, and we passed business cards. I don't have a business card with me today. I'll probably do. But anyway, I do, yeah. So here's my school meals business card. Okay. And here's my Vagabond Consult business card, where I act as a consultant. And there's a strap line on the back of that, which you can see here. How can I help? Okay. So back in the day, I had that strap line on my card back in 2003 when I met this man on the train. And he said to me, what does that mean? And I said, that's my offer to the universe. Now, my business was dying, right? But I was feeling quite buoyant about being, that we'd be fine. We'd figure it out. So the card said, how can I help? It was the name of the business was my coffee shop business at the time. And he said, what does that mean? I said, it's my offer to the universe. He said, I said, if you think I can help you with something, pick up the phone. If I can help you, I will. If I can't, I might find somebody who can. And he said, that's very interesting. And he put my card in his pocket. And he never rang me, but that didn't matter, because that happens most of the time we hand our business cards. People don't ring us, right? But here's where it changed. That evening, he went back to Limerick, and he gave my business card, because of that strapline, this is really important, to his boss. Okay. And he said, I met this guy on the train, and he said, if you're ever doing something with food, give this guy O'Brien a call. He's sort of an interesting character. 3 months later, his boss rang me and said, there's a government pilot program to provide healthy meals in schools for children in disadvantaged areas. Would you like to tender? I said, yes, thank you very much indeed. and we tendered and we won the contract. And that we fed 27 children. I'll never forget it, on our first day, and it was incredibly difficult. We had to retrain everything about how we operated. We fed 27 children, and roll on 21 years now. Last day of term, the end of June, we fed 30,000 children all over the island of Ireland. We have 250 people gainfully employed in the work we do, and that came from that one meeting. And the only reason that guy spoke to his boss about me was because of the strap line. How can I help? No strings attached. And I believe there's one of those man on the train moments, person on the train moments waiting for everybody that's listening to this podcast. It's out there in the universe with your name on it already. And the only question is, will you turn up?
Does it mean that we should always bet on ourselves, even if we're on our lows?
I believe so. Yes, I believe so. I go back to the man on the train. The man on the train moment that's out there for us all requires two things of us, in my opinion and in my experience. Number one, we must be out there meeting people. That's why I love this type of thing, Iryna. Thank you for reaching out and having this conversation. No idea where it'll go, but there's no agenda on your side or my side. And that's the second criterion. There has to be no agenda, just to be of service. How can I help? How can I help? Not what can I sell you, not what will you buy from me, not what are you looking for. There's one thing I really hate about LinkedIn at the moment, right? I get these LinkedIn requests coming in. As soon as I accept it, I get what we call it the pitch slap, right? Somebody straight in with the sale, and I'm saying, forget about it, buddy. Forget about it. It's not going to happen.
Just stop selling me something, yeah.
Stop selling, start serving. And that's the only reason I'm sitting here talking to you today, because of that strap line. So it's been on my business cards ever since, as you can imagine. And but yes, we need to bet on ourselves, and we need to believe that if we step out with integrity and step out to be of service, that the universe needs us to do that. It needs Iryna to set up this podcast, to have these conversations, right? It needs us to step out in our authenticity. I can never be you, and you can never be me. And one of the biggest challenges I see out there is people trying to be somebody else, and it's fake. And if it's fake, they'll see through it, and the doors aren't going to open. Be you, be truthful to you, step into the universe. What the universe has a plan for you, right? Just be you, and be open to see where that plan leads. And absolutely bet on yourself. Absolutely. I couldn't possibly imagine going back to a life where I was waiting on somebody else to write a paycheck for me. I couldn't possibly imagine that. Even though it's been very tough. It was very tough, and it hasn't been all roses since, by the way. With 3 years ago, because of COVID, we were within 48 hours of closing this business, multi-million euro business. So, it's not going to be necessarily easy. In fact, it won't be easy, but it will absolutely be worth it. I promise you that. It'll absolutely be worth it.
And second thought here, or question. I know that you provide and do a lot of keynotes to encourage other entrepreneurs and to help people to overcome this syndrome of avoiding failure. So does it, on your experience, you talk a lot to people, does it mean that failure is inevitable part of this process, or it means that we just need to improve our planning skills?
Failure is an absolutely inevitable part. An inevitable part. I talk about here in the Midwest of Ireland, rugby is the sport, and the Munster rugby team are legendary, right? And because they're dogged and they fight to the last bell. And I always talk about, there's a phrase I stumbled across years ago, can't remember from where. Sometimes I win and sometimes I learn. But most people say sometimes I win and sometimes I lose. I would often open a talk keynote with, to the audience, complete this sentence. Sometimes I win and sometimes and they all say lose, right? But professionals, Iryna, and you're one and I'm one, we never lose. We either win or we learn. The Munster rugby team either puts enough points on the board on the day to be considered the winners, or they go back to the dressing room because they didn't, and they watch the replay and they say, okay, I was out of position here. I can do this better, etc. So professionals never lose, never. Okay, we win or we learn. Okay, and you and I continually win or we learn, and it happens all the time. We're bidding for contracts the whole time in our school meals business, and sometimes we win and sometimes we learn. Right.
I fell in love with your framing, actually. I think those kind of framing are very powerful because it decreases your stress level. I mean, not to zero maybe, but dramatically. And here my third question. So you mentioned a lot of pressure when you had this crisis situation and when you were thinking about opening your business. So how, on your experience, how to support yourself, your mental health, your self-esteem, when you are in the middle of this learning situation?
Um, the thing that changed it for me, the long-term habit that changed it for me was reading, right? Or in this day and age, listening to podcasts such as this one, right? Learning from people who'd gone before me. Two things. Most businesses fail in the first 5 years. Accept it as a fact and take a step anyway, right? Accept it as a fact and take a step anyway. If you're going to fail, fail early and fail forward and fail fast, right? And learn from it. Win or learn, right? Anybody who gets into a business, anybody, including ourselves, right, expects it to succeed. But the odds are stacked against us. 80% in the first 5 years, and I believe 80% of those that remain in the next 5 years, right? So it's not for the faint-hearted, but be brave, bet on yourself, right? Fail forward, fail fast, fail early, get up and go again. And I think those who think that they're going to get into their business and it's going to work swimmingly from the very first time they start a business, it's like, I've never played golf, but it's like expecting to get a hole in one. Seriously, what are the odds, right? It ain't going to happen. Best laid plans of mice and men. No, there's a phrase I came across somewhere through reading, right? No battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. So it doesn't matter what your business plan is. And the banks, they want us to write up business plans and projections, and most of it is BS, right? We're making it up because we don't know. And as soon as we open the doors, as soon as we go live on our website, a customer is going to come in and ask a question that we hadn't thought about, right? And they see it differently to us. And our job is to respond to that and figure something out. We've got to ask ourselves, is there a gap in the market for what we want to do? But another phrase I heard, which is even more important, is there a market in that gap? Right? Is there a gap in the market? We'd all say, yes, there is. But is there sufficient market in that gap for it to become a business for you? Very important question for us to ask. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Another phrase, that's a Wayne Gretzkyism. Wayne Gretzky, Hall of Famer, ice hockey player from Canada. And it's a wonderful phrase. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So let's say there's somebody out they're listening to this and they're thinking, will I start my business? Won't I start my business? Okay. So let's say you don't start your business. What's the result? You've missed 100%. The result is zero. Nothing changes. That's the result. Guaranteed, right? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. What happens if you do take a shot and start your business? 50-50. 50-50, right? But isn't
Like
50-50? Well, isn't 50-50 far better than zero? 100, 0, 100. So I'm a huge believer in and I think this is the key, Iryna. You've decided to bet on yourself, and I've decided to bet on myself. And it took me a long time. I was 35 before I got brave enough to bet on myself, and it was scary. And here's something interesting, right? So I'd been running cafes for almost 20 years for other people, right? I was very experienced, okay? And on the Monday morning that I was opening the business that I'd been running for other people for years, I was so scared it wasn't funny, right? Dry mouth.
What's the difference?
Oh my God. Do you know what? I think the difference is the safety net. I think, and we're back to the fur-lined mousetrap. I think that's the fear, right? But think about it. It was 100% irrational. I had run very successful multi-million euro business for other people, right? And banked the money in their account, and they paid the bills, and they paid me my meager salary, right? And all of a sudden, it was all on me, and that was scary. And a friend of mine, my best friend, actually turned up that first morning to be our first customer. He drove down from Dublin 2 hours to be our first customer. I was so delighted to see him. He was wishing us well. But to be honest with you, I was more delighted that I didn't have to start. I took him for breakfast. And it was me, Joe, it was me abdicating and just delaying. And I wrote about it in my book, and I'll offer some audio versions of my book if somebody's interested for you to put out there if you wish. But it was, over the breakfast, I knew I was abdicating. I knew I was delaying, and I could feel this welling up in my gut. And eventually I said to John, we call him JB, I said, JB, I love you, man, but I got to go. And I kicked him out, and then it started. And that was 28 years ago. Sorry, 1998, what's that, 26 years ago? Yeah, well. Anyway, there you go.
And here we jump into the next question related to leadership. If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you need some people behind you. So when you're taking those kind of risks, you start your own business and you understand that you may fail and there is a crisis situation, how to support your team? Which kind of like leadership style is critical during those kind of situation? Because you need responsibility, you can't hide, and you're under pressure, and there are other people, you're responsible for them or not responsible.
It's a really good question. I think fundamentally, the people that we pull around us in those areas, in all of our years, even now, they are looking to us for leadership. They're looking to us for leadership, and leadership, by the way, starts here. If you can't lead yourself, you won't be able to lead other people. Okay, that reading principle that I alluded to earlier, I came across that through network marketing many years ago. Excuse me, and I learned to read a book a month. Was my diet, right? And it was just a book on personal development, a book on cash flow, a book on reading stories of different leaders. But it was all education. Because if you're going to go somewhere, as you say, if you're going to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go bring people with you, or go with people. But we got to learn from those that have gone ahead of us. There's a peak here. It's about 3,000 feet high. I don't know what that. Maybe it's at 1,000 meters, right? It's a lot, and you and I could walk it in a couple of hours. Okay, just put on the boots and up we go. And that's easily done, right? And that's like starting a business, a small business in your local town. You want to step out, and you don't want it to be very special necessarily. But if you want to climb Everest, you're going to need a team, and you're going to need somebody who's been there before. Okay, and the very best. I learned a lot through my own business failures, right? But the very best lessons are learned from others by reading other people's stories. Right, and avoiding some of the pitfalls, some of the landmines that they've stepped on in their journey. So reading books of people who've gone the business journey before you, critical and very inexpensive. You can read somebody's 40-year journey for €20, right? Richard Branson, I'm sure you many of your listeners, great guy to learn from. Just read his stuff, right? Follow him online. Tony Robbins, I like Tony Robbins. Robert Kiyosaki, a book that he wrote, Cash Flow Quadrant. He wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad, which I read, and then his second book was the one that actually flicked the switch for me. Rich Dad Poor Dad 2, the Cash Flow Quadrant, and it talked about the four players in the world of commerce: the employee, the self-employed, the business owner, the investor. And I was an employee at the time, and I was frustrated. I was a frustrated employee, and some people who are listening to this will know that they're frustrated. I think there's more in me. I can do more, but they're scared stiff, and I know that feeling. Okay. Then there was the business, the self-employed individual, and the self-employed individual. It's that person who steps out, but they want to go fast. They're going to stay on their own. I have a challenge with that, Iryna. I have a challenge with that because it might be great for the first 3 months or 3 years, but 15 years on, if you're still it. That's, somebody called that a prison sentence to me, right? If you got to turn up every day, you might be earning more than you were earning from the hourly rate, but you still got to turn up. So for me, when I looked at the cash flow quadrant, the left-hand side spoke of employees and self-employed, and what they had in common was they trade time for money. On the other side, the business owner, the investor, leverage both those things, time and money. And I was an employee, and I didn't want to be an employee. And when I learned from Kiyosaki that a self-employed person was really buying themselves a job, I said, I ain't doing that. So I realized I didn't want to be an employee. I also didn't want to be self-employed. I had no money, so I couldn't be an investor. So I had to learn the skills.
So it's basic must.
Yeah, I had to learn the skills and become a business owner. And it's been slow and painful, but here I am a quarter of a century later, and it's been absolutely worth it.
And here we jump into our last question. So you mentioned that books and stories, it's your like support group.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know that it's very hard to take a risk or chance when you have no support group, when all your environment, they tell you're going to fail, it's too risky, what the heck you're doing this. How to balance this, where to find this support group, or you just need to shut these little and big voices around and inside yourself? So how you manage this? Because I think we all have this kind of dialogues and pressure.
Yeah, really good question. Really good question. Going back to the cash flow quadrant, I really would recommend it's a book I recommend to anybody who's serious about learning the differences in the world of commerce. So my response to that question is, our friends and family love us. Let's start with that, right? And our friends and family say, oh, Colm, oh, Iryna, oh, Johnny, oh, Mary, really and truly, is that you? Nobody in your family ever did that before. Not sure. That might be okay for Iryna or Colm, but really, you? Now, we've all heard that, okay? I was the first one in my family to step out and bet on myself, okay? And it was, be careful, tread carefully. But I began to realize that while they loved me, probably still do, right? What I was doing was more risky for them than it was for me. They couldn't see themselves taking that risk. So they were sharing their opinion from where they were in themselves, right? And so if you want to take advice, or people are giving you advice, which is actually what most often happens, they'll sit you down over coffee or sit you down in the bar and say, come here, I'll tell you, I was thinking you shouldn't do this because ABC. Ask yourself, and this is a really important question, are they in their lives where you want to be in yours? Yes or no? Yes or no? If it's been, your brother-in-law who's been 25 years in the public service, right? And he's telling you can't start a business. With respect to him, he might be the nicest guy in the world, but he's got no right to give you that opinion because he's got zero credibility. If Richard Branson sits down with you and says, I think, Iryna, you're onto something there. Now we're talking, right? So ask yourself, on the cash flow quadrant, somebody's giving you advice unsolicited. Ask themselves, where are they on that cash flow quadrant? Are they an employee? Because you're stepping out. You don't want to be an employee. You certainly do not want opinions from employees, right? Are you building a business and this person has been self-employed for 25 years? Tread carefully, right? Find business owners. If you want to build a business, find business owners. If you want to invest, find investors. Is that okay? Yeah. And where do you find them? I'm a huge fan of networking. Clearly, the man in the train, right? Go meet people. Join a business network. I started my official business network journey by joining BNI, Business Network International. This isn't a promotion of them, but it was hugely beneficial to me. And I joined that organization and left that organization and rejoined it some years later and left it some years later. But I met people. So you got to be out there. The man on the train. You got to be out there doing your thing. That's the first thing. You got to be out meeting people and seek out those people that are further down the road than you are and learn from them.
I think today with social media, we have a little bit those kind of information and support from like people who are a little bit, they are already there where we want to be, so we can like follow them, learn from them in real time. And it's very valuable.
Absolutely. It's easier now for sure than it was. But and the only challenge with that, not to be in any way negative, is just be careful, make sure you're following bona fide people. I do have a problem with the influencer generation. These people some of them who happen to just have been born beautiful, and therefore they think they've got the right to tell us how to live our lives, right? And you got these brands throwing money at them and, drive this car and, and that's, I go back to it. Be authentic. You be you.
And you need to act. You can't just follow. You can't just learn. You can't just network. You need to act. I think it's the most important thing. You need to act.
If you don't act, none of it's been worth it. But it took me a long time to learn. I started this journey of personal development at age 30, right? Because I remember I was frustrated in my life. I didn't know what was wrong, but I was frustrated. And then I stumbled into network marketing. And that was, I spent 10 years in that space. It's not for me, but I spent 10 years in that space. But I learned the value of education and associated with people who are further ahead than me. I learned the value of that. But it took me 5 years of immersion in that world and reading books about business and personal development. It took me 5 years of soaking in that environment before I was brave enough to step out and bet on myself. So if you've spent 5 years, 10 years, 20, 25 years in the corporate world, it's a very difficult place to extract yourself from, but it's doable. But give yourself time. Give yourself time, right? Learn, grow. Your business can never outgrow you. Your business can never outgrow you, right? My business back in the day was €1 million business. Thankfully, I've grown, and we've now got we'll do 17 million this year. So, but that's only because I've grown, right? To be able to receive that. The universe will pay us based on our worth, okay? And, you know, years ago, they used to say, well, you know, if you won the lottery, you'd be a millionaire. No, you wouldn't. If you won the lottery and won $1 million in the lottery today, I heard somebody say, you need to become a millionaire to retain it. And it didn't make sense to me at the time, because if you won $1 million, surely you're a millionaire. No, you're not. A millionaire thinking is here. Absolutely here. So again, statistics, pick a number, a high number. 80% of those who win €1 million in the lotto lose it within 3 years. Why? Because they're not a millionaire. They just got money, right? So your business can never outgrow you. Start with you. Give yourself time. Soak in new information. Meet new people. Follow new people. Grow. And when the time is right, and you'll know when the time is right, step.
Amazing. And final question. You were talking a lot about reading, and you mentioned Robert Kiyosaki book. Maybe there is some other powerful pieces you would recommend to almost everyone who want to learn how to bet on themselves?
Well, I have read lots of books over the years. Robert Kiyosaki, crucial to me. How to Win Friends and Influence People, a classic book. Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. Susan Jeffers, she spoke about this sort of, you know, you have a fork in the crossroads, right? And you're wondering, will I go here? Will I go here? Well, if I go here, what? I'll miss all that's on that path. And if I go here, I'll miss all that's on that path. And she said, forget about it. If you go here, you'll win all that's on that path, right? You forget about the other path and move. So there's some great books out there, right? And the way I would read a book, and if that book, and oftentimes authors refer to other authors, and I would go there, I'd follow the crumbs. So if they mentioned another author, I'd say, okay, you know, this author that I likes that author, there must be something in it, I'll go there. So read and give yourself 10 a day, 10 minutes a day. In fact, in recent times, it has shifted. And I'm conscious of your time, Iryna. I use this phrase, 1% living. I learned that, I realized that 1% of your day, my day, is 14.4 minutes. There are 1,440 minutes in every day. 1% is 14.4 minutes. The easiest number for us to figure out is 15 minutes, quarter of an hour, right? So I recommend we do something positive in our lives proactively for 15 minutes, 1%. I call it 1% living. And we do something positive. And there are 4 areas I recommend people consider. Their health, right? Very important. Their wealth, not necessarily about getting rich, but that they've got enough and they're not stressed about it. Their relationships, starting with themselves, right? And their spirit, which is probably a relationship with themselves and or a higher power, right? Health, wealth, relationships, and spirit. If you spend 15 minutes doing something positive, reading a book, checking your bank account, right? Ringing your parents or your brother, right? Sitting quietly overlooking water, which is my favorite thing to do. 1%, that's only 1 hour in a day, and you only do it 4 days in a week. I'm great at letting myself off the hook. I absolutely dislike these people who say, Colm, you need to be busting your gut 24/7. Every second counts. Forget about it. No interest. I reckon those people have had some trauma in their lives. They're trying to work through it, right? Not for me. So here's my take on it. 1% living in 4 areas: health, wealth, relationships, and spirit. 15 minutes, and only do it 4 days in the week. If you do it 4 days in the week, it's 4 over 7. You've won the week. And if you win 1 week, you repeat it the next week, and win the week, win the year is my mantra. 1% living. There you go.
I think it's amazing application of Robert Kiyosaki approach to investment and all of this, but to your personal time, do this like baby steps, but you're very persistent with them, and they pay you back in long term because they form your habit, they form your focus, and you're literally doing something which pays you back. Yeah, it's amazing.
And your habits determine your future. So if somebody's starting the journey, the most important thing is start, and then be patient with yourself. Be patient with yourself, right? You've taken 25 years to get to where you are now, right? See, it's not going to change in 3 months, right? You can take a step and begin to affect change. But I tell you, if you're consistent with the type of stuff we've spoken about here today, I promise you, 5 years from now, your life will be completely transformed if you're consistent, patient and consistent.
I think it's the most powerful ending I ever had. Patient and consistent sounds very direct and very influential. Thank you so much, Colm, for your time. We have a lot of comments from our speakers. I think this topics to a lot of people. We all have the same issues. So I think we brought some pieces of valuable advice today, and thank you for sharing your story. It's very powerful, and your ideas as well. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone who are joining us live or going to watch us later.
My pleasure. I have written a book, Feeding Johnny. It's on the journey that I've just spoken about. It's the first 10 years of Carambola. I've got an audio version which I can present to anybody who wants to follow me. If they connect with me on LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn, and I will send them a copy of the audio version of the book for free.
And I encourage everyone to do that.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.